Hello, it's me. I'm back again. I've been struggling a little with this whole podcast thing, and I need a bit of a dig out from one, some, or Bollies. What I've been struggling with. Fuck, where to even start? Right. This has been typical. The way I've started this podcast has been typical of the way I've started the last 10 recordings that I've made in the last 2 days, which I've since deleted because I've started talking as I have now with, a vague idea of, what I had in my head to mention. But then I've distracted myself, as I tend to do, and I've gone down too much of a tangent or too much of a rabbit hole. I lose my train of thought. I'm really opposed to the idea of pausing the recording and kind of starting again. I'm not fundamentally opposed to it. I'll do it on occasion, but ideally I'd not. In the same sense that when I started recording the conversations with guests, I never went down the editing route. And having spoken to my little brother post our conversation, the little bit of, quote unquote editing that I've been doing, the equalization part, what came out in the wash of our conversation, because he has his own podcast, the All About You podcast, that I recommend you check out. It's all about emotional well-being as opposed to mental health. But anyway, because he is a podcast, we were putting our heads together basically as to how we produce, for want of a better term, our podcasts and upload them and where we upload them to and all that kind of back end stuff that the listener needn't worry about. Not that there's a whole pile, and again, if anybody's interested in starting their own podcast, number one, I couldn't recommend it more highly, and number two, fucking hit me up an email and I'll give you a dig out. I'll just show you fucking a way around a couple of potholes to save you fucking falling into them. No doubt you'll make your own mistakes, and so you should, but not the same mistakes that everybody fucking makes. Skip those and make new mistakes. Anyway, in the last number of recordings that I've made, I get to this point and I go, oh fuck, I'm after forgetting, bollocks, and just delete the whole fucking lot. And I might have only done a minute there, but I could have done maybe 10 minutes in another one. So the whole thing has been a really steep learning curve, but in a good way. Not without its fucking stresses and its anxiety and other kind of relatively negative things. But look, that's all part and parcel of fucking life too. You have to embrace that kind of shit, and if you don't have adversity in your life, you'll be the worse off for the lack of it. Now, obviously, you don't want to be inundated with too much adversity, and the whole thing just comes crumbling down on top of you, and you end up having a fucking panic attack or fucking getting depressed or whatever. But I digress, as always. The point. I've been struggling with the solo episodes of late because, I don't know, my own standard is too fucking high, I think. And that can be a good thing, but it can also be quite a crippling thing, because I make a recording and I go, no, fuck it, it's not good enough, and then I don't want to do one straight away. I don't do one that evening, I don't do one the next day, I don't do the next day, and then you've built up this thing, I haven't done one in a couple of days, and you build up a bit of pressure, and it's all conflated nonsense, basically. So what I've been trying to figure out is why I'm doing what I'm doing and what I'm doing. So trying to figure out why I'm doing what it is that I'm doing, but before I think that's the problem. Just thinking out loud, I think it's kind of half coming to me. I've been trying to figure out why I've been doing what I've been doing, and what's the end goal, and is this a Navan thing? Is this an Irish thing? Is this a global thing? Is it a Navan thing before it's an Irish thing before it's a global thing? Is it online? Is it offline? Is it both? And why am I doing it? Like, what's the kind of motivation? What's the end goal? Because I've started loads of things over the years, only not to continue them, and like that's fine. You should try things and not continue them if you see fit. But with this, I feel like I don't know, I just don't want to be fucking wasting people's time, I suppose, to a certain degree. I don't know. And again, here's another classic example of, I'm kind of half losing the run of myself, I'm half losing my train of thought. No, it's bollocks. Delete it, it's no good. You're only wrecking people's heads, whatever. But I think I've committed to soldiering on in this one, as bad as the recording may become, and just fucking upload it anyway, and do the same with the next one, and the next one, at the very least until I knock out the 40, because that whole 40 thing has been a bit fucking, I don't know, probably needlessly stress-inducing. And I'll get back to how I'm struggling and what the podcast is and will become in a minute, but just on that point, I didn't pick a great time, I don't think, to do the whole 40 podcasts in 40 days thing. Now, the reason I just bit the bullet and said fuck it and did it, and I don't regret doing that for a second, but the reason that I did it, like the method in my madness was, there was never going to be a good time. Like when I started it, don't quote me on the time frame here, but I was 2 months out, no, it wouldn't have been 2 months, I was probably a fortnight out from herself's due date. So to say that it wasn't a perfect time would have been putting it mildly. I had just taken on a big contract with work, as well as that, and all the other fucking trials and tribulations that fucking life throws in you on a fucking daily basis, basically. But I said, fuck it, no, I'll do it, because if I don't do it now, I won't do it in a month, because in a month, there'll be a newborn in the house. And in 2 months' time, there'll be a fucking a month or two old baby in the house. And there's always something. And people postpone things waiting for the perfect time, and the perfect time never comes, and then your life is over. So there's great utility in just saying, fuck it, there'll never be a perfect time, so let's just start it. But I went a little too far, I think. Now maybe I didn't. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts on this are. I'mOffTheLead@gmail.com will get me. So even there now, I'm after fucking losing my train of thought by dropping in that I'mOffTheLead@gmail.com thing. And again, should I be doing that? Should I be addressing, the audience or listeners or whatever it is? Or should I be just fucking talking to myself? Should it be my internal dialogue and never mind the would-be kind of listener thing? Because I literally interrupted myself there by dropping in you can contact me on now, I'mOffTheLead@gmail.com. Shut the fuck up, Frano, and just talk. And see where it goes. And try and achieve that fucking flow state. Try and achieve that, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it becomes, of talking that when you finish, you go, what the fuck did I just say? Did you ever drive somewhere? And you get there and you kind of go, I don't remember the last 20 minutes of that journey. Or I don't remember going through that town. Or you might say, did I drive through Trim on my way here? I can't even remember. And that's analogous to a flow state, I think. I suppose it's acting without realising you're acting. And by acting, I mean just making your way through the world without really being that conscious of it. It's being consumed with a moment, which is essentially what all, I can't think of the umbrella term, guru's not the right one, but the Joseph Campbells, the Alan Watts, who else? Like the Sam Harrises, all the enlightened, or more enlightened than most people, all rant and rave about this idea of being in the present moment. And that if you're not in the present moment, you're always almost preparing for the future, but that future never comes. I think it was Joy Booth that actually had me talking about, or had me thinking about Alan Watts. I think she mentioned that she was a big fan, and I kind of went, oh yeah. People keep mentioning him to me, and they have done over the years, and I've tried to listen to him on YouTube, but he has this, not persona, he has this vibe, I suppose you could call it, whereby he and all these other kind of super enlightened people, they all tend to talk quite slowly and methodically, and they're very thoughtful people, and every word is beautifully crafted within the sentence, and that shit just fucking bugs me. There's something, I wouldn't call it fake, because I don't think any of the guys that I mentioned there are remotely fake, but there's just something about it that kind of rubs me up the wrong way. But anyway, what was it that Watts was saying that resonated with me recently? I don't know. Again, I've gone and interrupted myself, and I don't know what this sounds like. And I was just about to say, I don't know what this sounds like to the listener. And again, is that what's killing the kind of the flow state that I'm trying to achieve? I think I need to kind of get out of my own way and forget that I'm being recorded, because I'm conscious of the solo episodes running too long. That's one thing, because the 20 minutes, people seem to like that. But again, am I just fucking muddying the waters with this idea that, people seem to like it, so do it that way? I really think that I'm really beginning to think that I have to get the fuck out of my own way and just talk. And even if there's no beginning, middle and end to any of the episodes, and maybe if they're fucking all over the place, even more so than usual, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe people will stop listening. Maybe that doesn't matter. I don't want to really monetize the podcast. I do and I don't. That's been a tricky one. That's another thing that I've been kind of struggling to get my head around. Like, should I be charging people for it? I don't like the idea of charging people for it, because as soon as you start charging people for it, it becomes almost an elitist thing. What about the people who can't afford it? Oh, well, fuck them. I don't want that. I can sell merchandise. It's absolutely something I'm going to do. Be interesting to see if anybody has any interest. Like, if any of it actually sells. But look, I'll start off small, and it'll probably make a loss at the start. But that loss will more than likely be... what's the word? I'll more than likely be insulated against whatever losses that might accrue by my patrons. And to those of you who've gone on to www.patreon.com/offthelead and have financially supported me to the tune of €1 a month or more, or maybe a once-off payment, thank you very much. That's a fucking sincere thank you. And that should make you fucking feel very, very fucking good. It genuinely should, because it just embodies the idea that you're voting with your money. Like you're literally paying for what you want to see more of in this world. And if you're not supporting the podcast, because you can't afford to, or whatever, that's obviously grand. But one thing that you can do if you can't afford to support either this or something else, don't support things that you don't want to see more of. So you mightn't be able to support this platform or other platforms that you might want to support. But we can all afford to not support things that we don't want to see more of. And again, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I want to get back to what I was saying at the outset of this. You know, why I'm doing what I'm doing, what it is exactly that I'm doing. I don't know which of those comes first. Defining what it is that I've been doing, or I'm striving to do, or I'm looking to do. Is it those, or one of those? Or is it how I'm doing it? Should it just be conversations? Should it just be solo episodes? Should one guide the other? And that's what I'm leaning towards, I think. I want to move away, and I think I've mentioned this before. I don't want to be interviewing people. I don't really have that much I do have interest in interviewing people, but I don't think there's any longevity in me being an interviewer. There's something to interviewing people the first time they come on. And I think that's what kind of happened with Anthony Murphy a little. He came on, I interviewed him, I kind of, I suppose, got to know him a little, and hopefully so did the listener. They got a handle on him. So maybe there's something in that. I get a guest on, we speak for 1, 2, 3 hours, whatever it is, but it's an interview. They do that, brilliant. But then maybe there's a next step. So maybe the next step is getting them back on. Having got all the kind of bullshit out of the way, having got the interview out of the way, having gone out of each other's way, having let the guests kind of understand basically what they're in for, what the format is like, you know, what I'm like. Because for the most part, new guests mightn't necessarily have ever really heard the Off the Lead podcast before. So they're obviously going to be a little bit reserved. Far more reserved than they would be had they been on already. So take Andy Ryan, for example. I interviewed him. And that, you know, went on for an hour and a half, and that was great. But I'd love to have a chat with him again, because that conversation would far more likely be an Off the Lead conversation. Because I don't think the conversation that I had with Andy Ryan was off the lead. He's off the lead, no fucking doubt about it. But I don't think that conversation was. Not in the same way that mine and Pat O'Reilly's conversation was. That was off the lead. That was about fucking everything and anything, and you know, we both took risks in that. And there's an element of taking risk it kind of goes hand in hand with the off the lead mentality, I think. I'm not sure that there's something there. Risk is a big part of it, I think. The opposite of risk in that sense is kind of safety. And if you're very safe, if you're not willing to stick your neck out there and try something different, or push the boundaries, or test yourself, or push yourself, you're on the lead, you're safe, you're being protected by someone or something, or I wouldn't go on that podcast, God knows what I'd say, I wouldn't take that risk. And the people who've come on, fair fucking play to them, because it is kind of risky. Now, only fucking kind of risky. Don't fucking blow it up to be more than what it is. It's not as if I really go after people. It's not as if I, will push and push and push and prod and poke and get you to say something that's, you get you to espouse a view you didn't really realise you held. That's not what I'm about at all, not in the least. My job is made a hell of a lot easier by people who have something to say. But I'd be interested to hear people's feedback in relation to the idea of getting people on a second time. Because Ivor came on a second time, but that was he kind of came on the second time to finish his story, to almost finish the interview. Now, we did do a good bit of both those conversations. I think it's fair to say we're off the lead. Just given the subject matter, I suppose. But I think in the same way that I didn't want to have any real editing in the conversations. Sorry, let me start that again. I don't edit the conversations, and there's no script or there's no nothing. It's just as free-flowing a conversation as I can make it. And my thought on not editing it originally was better to get better at conversations, or being a conversationalist, if that's a word. It's better to get better at doing that than to get better at, post-production and editing. And I think there's something analogous there with the solo episodes. Instead of having bullet points so that I don't go off topic too much, I think I'm better off essentially uploading a load of bad ones, not bad ones, but ones that aren't as good as they could be, but viewing it as almost a form of training to get better. Put your energy into getting better at what it is that you're doing, not getting better at editing what it is that you're doing. But I think what I've been struggling with more than most is, what is it that I'm doing? And why am I doing it? And which one of those comes first? What should I be concentrating on? What is it that I'm trying to do? Or why I'm trying to do what I'm doing? Because I think each one guides the other, but I don't know which one should get precedence or which one is more important. It's a funny dynamic. And there's an element of that in each of us as individuals. Because there's a what you are and a who you are. And I think a lot of time has been taken up with this notion of, who am I? That great existential question that we all ask ourselves from time to time. Maybe not all of us. I don't know. I obviously can't speak for everyone. But it's in kind of popular culture, this notion of, who am I? But we rarely hear, I've never heard say, this notion of what am I? And what I mean by that is, what are you? Like, fundamentally, what are you? If you were to be, cryogenically frozen and examined in 200 years, when we've made, massive advances in all sorts, and they did an autopsy on your brain, what would you be described as? Height, width, top speed, all those things you could kind of figure out. But what I'm talking about is that in the brain? We can see here with the size of the amygdala that this person was prone to X, Y, and Z. And that's based on purely just the physical structure of your brain. Because I'm increasingly convincing myself that our brains are as different as our bodies. Now, what I mean by that is, my brain is different to your brain, in the same way that my body is different to your body. So presumably we still have 2 legs and 2 knees and 2 fucking aortas and spleens, and we all have the same component parts. But maybe my legs are a little bit longer or thicker or shorter, or maybe I've got bigger hands or smaller hands. And we have that same physicalness in our domes, between our ears. If you were 6'8" and 70 kgs, if that was your kind of walk around weight, that was your natural frame, you're this big fucking really tall, really gaunt, skinny person, you wouldn't presumably get into powerlifting because you just don't have the frame for it. In the same sense that if you were, 5'4" and 100 kilos, you wouldn't get into, basketball, because you wouldn't have the physical features for it. And I think that there's something analogous there with the brain. But with our physical appearance, our height and width and whatever else, that's quite obvious. We can kind of see that. But the brain is a lot more nuanced, to put it mildly. But we can still figure out what we are. Like, are you an aggressive person? Are you a timid person? Are you a confident person? Are you a introverted person? Are you an intelligent person? And I think I just think that we should try to understand what we are on a real base level, fundamental level, before we even try and decide, who we are or who we might be. Or maybe this whole thing is just, maybe my whole train of thought here is completely wrong-headed. So, what's the point of what I'm saying here? I've been trying to figure out what this podcast, and it's not just a podcast, what this whole movement thing or the whole off the lead thing is. Is it local? Is it global? Is it both? Is it is it this? Is it that? Is it the other? But until I get a better handle on what and who I am, those two things being quite distinct from each other, I'm never really going to be able to fully articulate what off the lead is or might become. And I think that's where I'm going to I think that's what I'm going to do with the solo podcasts, is do more of the same, have this recording be more of an exemplar for what future recordings might be like. So, essentially uploading my internal dialogue, trying as best as I can to, forget that there's a listener or mention a fucking email address or any of that shit. That stuff just gets in the way. I mean, like I could include that as a little audio clip at the end of every podcast. You know, want to get in touch? Contact this, and here's the Patreon, and here's the whatever, and here's this, and here's that, and the other. Just a little pre-recorded audio thing. I could just stick that in at the end of every podcast, which might just save me feeling the need to ever mention, you know, the email address or anything else for that matter, whilst I'm kind of spitballing, because it does tend to get in the way, and I tend to lose my train of thought, as I have now, even just explaining this. But I think if people get the opportunity to listen to me figure out what and who I am, I think that would be a great example to people, like a real kind of, like a worthwhile example of how they might do something similar themselves, as opposed to me, you know, trying to tell you, because I think I've tried to give people, I've tried to, I suppose, educate people to a degree up until this point. Something that I don't regret by any stretch of the imagination. But I've tried to explain certain things and open people up to certain things. The idea being that the more that they're exposed to, the more different things that they're exposed to, the more they might start thinking for themselves, for a start, if nothing else. But also make them that little bit more aware that there might be more to life than what they will be aware of otherwise. And I suppose it's essentially what I'm trying to do, and I think it's encapsulated in what seems to be becoming the kind of the slogan, say, this idea of provoking conversations and initiating change. Like, I'm not happy with the status quo, say. I'm not happy with the way things are. And I was actually chatting to a billionaire a couple of months ago. Pierce Lyons. I can't think of the man's first name. But he actually only passed away recently. But he was speaking to a group of us in relation to entrepreneurship, and he described entrepreneurship in a way that really resonated with me. And he described it, and I'm paraphrasing this as always, but you'll get the sentiment. He described entrepreneurship as a life of dissatisfaction. And that resonated with me, and still does. And it's a fucking burden, entrepreneurship. And if you really want to change anything, like if you're unhappy with society, say, or culture, or whatever it is, if you're unhappy with it now, odds are you'll always be unhappy with it, because you're not going to end up living in your utopia. Not that you would want to. I think people should have a protopian viewpoint, not a utopian viewpoint. Let's make what we have marginally better. Because even if you could wave your magic wand and change everything, as soon as it becomes perfect, it becomes boring, I suppose. Continuous improvement, I think, is where it's at. So strive maybe to have a protopian viewpoint as opposed to a utopian viewpoint. So maybe if I concentrate on, I suppose, figuring myself out, and again, I suppose like what I said from the start, if people listen, well and good. If they don't, dilly gaff. But I think this is what's going to be most beneficial for me. And that might sound like an intrinsically selfish way of viewing things. And maybe it is. But I have a, it's not quite a theory, but a hypothesis, say, that selfishness is, like supreme selfishness, is the way forward in many respects. Because, and I think I might have mentioned this before. If I haven't, I fucking should have. But the idea being that if I'm supremely selfish, like fucking pathologically selfish, 100% entirely self-centered, that means that in order for me to have any degree of happiness whatsoever, or to achieve that, happiness is the wrong term, but whatever your measurement is, whether it's happiness or fulfillment or whatever, in order for me to maximize that, my kids have to have it made. My partner has to be fucking as happy as she can possibly be. My friends and family have to be, you know, they have to have essentially a perfect life before I can. So there's great utility in selfishness. I think selfishness has got a bad rap, and that's something that I'm going to certainly revisit. But in somewhat of a conclusion, because I'm after pulling up the Keelings here, I have to get out. I think that's what I'm going to do from now on, is basically just upload what will essentially be my internal dialogue, just my own fucking thoughts, me in my own head, and, you know, forget that there's a listener. Because I think that's what's going to be most beneficial to me in the short term, and to the off the lead movement or whatever it is in the long term. So, on that somewhat waffly note, I feel a little bit more settled. I think that I'll probably do another recording now shortly, because I think I'm after clearing that up in my head a little. And I think the more I talk about it, and the more of a flow state that I can get into, the more I can get out of my own way, the quicker I'll be at figuring out what this is, where it's going,